So morning everyone, and thanks Ellie for inviting me to talk about our citizen science project here in Worcestershire. Before I go on to that, just a little bit about me. I've been leading the communications work here at the Wildlife Trust for about 15 years now, but I'm also a active member of the recording community here, which is quite a large community, quite a lot of groups, and a lot of people willing to share their amazing and incredible knowledge. If I wasn't here talking to you this morning, just across the way here at Lower Smythe Farm, which is the Trust HQ, the Worcestershire Recorders are having their annual meeting. So at some point around lunchtime, I will sneak off and go to their meeting, and I appear to be moonlighting this morning. So wildlife sightings. So we've got this incredibly active recording group here in Worcestershire, who are really willing to share their knowledge, as I'm sure many of you are as well. And I'm sure it will come as no surprise to you that recording wildlife is a relatively niche activity. And within the Trust and the Recorders and the Biological Records Centre, we've been talking quite a lot about how we can get people on that journey. From a Trust point of view, we talk to a lot of people who are really keen about wildlife, love their wildlife, don't really understand how important it is to record it. How can we move people on that journey? We've had wildlife ID courses, bio-blitzes, events, and we've struggled to move people on. Now, there is only going to be a relatively niche group of people who want to move on to wildlife recording, but how can we help them? How can we support them? And how can we increase their numbers? Then COVID struck. From my point of view, our digital comms went into overdrive. We were trying to produce all sorts of different information and resources to help people understand what they were seeing. There were lots and lots of reports in the news about people were suddenly switching on to listening to the birds singing, or the bees buzzing, the butterflies fluttering. So this was our moment. If we couldn't make a recording scheme work then, we were probably never going to manage it. So I chatted to our engagement team leader, Nick. We extended that conversation out to the Worcestershire Recorders and the Biological Records Centre, and we wanted to use lockdown and this newfound interest in the natural world to springboard some kind of recording scheme, and Wildlife Sightings was born. We launched it in May 2020, so it took us a couple of weeks to get things together, chat about how we could make it work. It went out on the Trust's website. We were the most digitally advanced of the three partners. So I created a web page about why it's important to record wildlife, how you can get involved. We popped a form on there, you know, the what's, the whens, the wheres. And we also put a box on there about what else can you tell us about what you saw? How many bees did you see? What kind of flowers were they feeding on? That kind of information that makes the record a lot richer. And sometimes as recorders, we get a little bit focused on the how many's, and we forget about some of that other background information. The other thing that we made absolutely essential was that people had to send in a photograph. This has caused some consternation amongst some people, members of the public, who perhaps don't understand the importance of verifying a record. But actually, it's been really, really important, not just for us as a springboard for us to chat to people about why they might think that something is one identification when actually it's another. We've been able to get more information out of the photographs that have been sent in, other than just it is this species. So hopefully, albeit some people haven't appreciated that they need to send in a photograph, actually it's helped engagement and it's helped with the knowledge of the recorders, especially as many of these recorders have been absolutely brand new to this. We recognise that actually we could say to people, just send us a record, but it would be much better if we targeted a few species. So could we come up with a series of species to say, have you seen these in your garden or in your local green spaces while you've been going out on your lockdown walks? Together with the recorders, we chose 6 species that tell stories of these particular species in the county, whether that be declines, increases, could they tell us about climate change and how that's having an impact. We were running a national campaign at the time called Action for Insects, so we decided to choose 6 species that are there on the screen. We also chose these 6 species because they're relatively easy for most members of the public to identify, or they're already familiar with them. And perhaps just as importantly, they are easy for recorders to verify from incredibly blurry records, photos, and we have had some incredibly blurry photos submitted. Anyone who signed up via our website was also invited to subscribe to a monthly e-newsletter with information about the target species and things to look forward to, or things to look for in the month ahead. So how did we do? Well, we were never sure whether we were going to get many records at all. So the fact that we received 140 in the first year from May to the end of December, actually we were really bowled over with. Now I realise that I'm talking to a lot of recorders, and 140 records doesn't really seem like an awful lot in the grand scheme of things. But these are by and large records that we would never have got from people who had never recorded before. Now, I know there are a couple of people in the audience today whose names I recognise and have submitted records to Wildlife Sightings and are also submitting records elsewhere. But the vast majority of records that came in that first year and subsequently came in from people who have never recorded before. Lots of people were telling us about what they were seeing in their gardens, on their lockdown walks. A reasonable proportion were signing up to our e-newsletter. But we didn't really have the capacity to engage in the way that we wanted to. Both Nick and I, this was a small part of our job. We were getting a monthly e-newsletter out and we were replying to people who were sending things in but had got the identification wrong. We had an automated e-newsletter that went out when you submitted a record that said, thanks ever so much for submitting, we'll get back to you if we need to. And that was about all we could do. It wasn't really what we wanted. We wanted better engagement. We wanted to be able to contact people and have a conversation and start that journey, that conversation going. How can we better support you? So towards the end of 2020, one of our recorders said, you know what, just before the pandemic hit, somebody had moved into the county and she wanted to get in touch with the BRC. She wanted to do some volunteering, but the pandemic hit. We all started working from home and she's kind of just been hanging there. Do you want to have a chat with her? So we set up a Zoom chat, and welcome to Diana Westmoreland, who has been the saviour of wildlife sightings. So whereas Nick and I were doing what we could, Diana had the time and has got the enthusiasm, the commitment, the dedication, the energy to really put into this project. She not only nurtures the data that comes through, but she also nurtures the recorders as well. So almost everybody who gets in touch with us at some point will have some form of conversation with Diana. She's been absolutely fantastic. With Diana's help, the scheme has gone from strength to strength, and you can see in the graph there just how many records we're starting to get in and how the scheme is snowballing. So we've had over 1,300 verified records in the first 4 years, which again doesn't sound like absolutely massive amounts, but you can see the growth. We really are starting to spread out. I'm really proud of those 1,300 records. Our aim has always been to gather long-term data. And that was one of the reasons for choosing 6 target species, as well as actually that's much easier for the public to understand. We've had to play with that data set, those 6 species, our target species. So we still have the same 6, but we did debate whether or not to take common carderby out because records weren't really coming in the way that we thought they would, and they were quite often misidentified. We had the debate, but instead of taking it out, we just added red-tailed bumblebee into the mix, and that's actually dramatically increased the amount of bumblebee records that come in. I should say, for any of you out there who know that there are species of common, very similar to common carderby and red-tailed bumblebee, we are on the lookout for those when the photos come in, but we have far fewer of those in the county than we do of common carder and red-tailed. We recognised that not everybody are insect lovers. Some people, you know, they like birds and plants and mammals and things, strange folk. So we added some birds and plants and mammals and things in there. And we've actually now got a list of 15 target species. We have dropped one species, and it was a hard decision to make, but marmalade hoverflies just were not working. We just weren't getting the records in. That long-term data set was never going to happen. I was very keen that we kept a fly in there though, so we swapped marmalade hoverflies for Batman hoverflies. For those of you that don't know, there's a mark on the thorax of a Batman hoverfly that looks remarkably like the Batman symbol. And this has gone down with the public a lot better than marmalade hoverflies. They're a lot more appealing when you say, have you seen Batman about? And we have got a lot more records in of those than we did have of marmalades. The other thing that we added in that was a little bit controversial was the non-native box tree moth. Now, when we added this, they were rampaging across the UK countryside, but we had bewilderingly few records of them in Worcestershire. We weren't sure whether that was because they were genuinely overlooked or they genuinely weren't here. So we added them into wildlife sightings. I say controversially because it's very difficult to put a spin on something that eats the box in all sorts of people's gardens when they shouldn't be here in the first place. Last year was absolutely amazing. Our records went quite potty with people submitting records of box tree moths. And wildlife sightings appeared to be at the forefront of this. We were getting far more records in than any of the other traditional recording sources. But it did appear by the time the records started coming in from traditional recorders towards the end of the year, when it got a bit quiet in winter, that actually we weren't really at the forefront. We were just reflecting what was happening elsewhere in the recording community, which is also been quite nice to see that wildlife sightings isn't just a blip of random people out there, random members of the public recording the occasional things. Actually, we are also reflecting what the recording community and in the wider sense is reporting too. So in 2023, we decided that 15 target species was quite enough, thank you very much. And that's it now. We have no plans to change that list. That's the data set that hopefully we will build up long term. At Diana's request, she was quite determined that we would start to really proactively go after just any old record as well as the target species. I was a little bit nervous about this because I know how many species there are out there that you can't really identify from just one photo, or necessarily identify from just one photo. But Diana has been proved right, and she's had great fun doing it as well. So you can see in the graph there just how many, what the increase has been in non-target species. Phenomenal since we really went proactive about it, but also that the target species are still increasing in numbers. So we're still building that long-term data set, whilst Diana is having great fun dealing with all sorts of photographs that come in. She's been contacting various experts, jumping onto Facebook groups to try and get the identification of some of these species. Just one of those is this one here, Catherine Dunnow, who actually does record more than just the occasional thing, and is a fantastic photographer, quite often out on our nature reserves. She happened to be walking her dog Chance in her local area in quite urban Worcester. Chance stopped to sniff something on the pavement. Catherine looked down, saw that there was something there that she didn't recognise, snapped a quick photograph of it on her phone. It scuttled off. She went home to have a look on Google to see if she could find out what it was. She thought that she had tracked down the identification, so she sent it on to us and said, I think this is something called Agrothreutes abbreviatus. Is it? We had a minor panic because we have no ichneumon experts in the trust or within the county, so we threw it up to the national experts, who confirmed that yes, this was Agrothreutes abbreviatus, the 4th modern record and only the 11th record for the entire UK. So I threw a press release out there. It generated quite a lot of interest. Initially, it was picked up by Worcester News. It was then picked up by the Birmingham Live that you see there. We also did interviews on our local radio, BBC Hereford and Worcester, and on BBC Midlands Today TV as well. So it got some nice publicity and brought in a flurry of records on the back of it. I've been shoehorning wildlife sightings into as many quotes to the press that I can possibly manage. Some stories have stayed local, some have been syndicated out to titles across the newspapers groups. So a Worcestershire spider story ended up in a Manchester paper. We had all sorts of records of spiders from Manchester, including one that someone had knitted. And we had a convolvulus hawk moth larvae on one of our nature reserves. Again, I popped a press release out, a quote in there about wildlife sightings. It went regional. and actually it went national, and we had several convolvulus hawk moth larvae reported from elsewhere in the country. The good thing about that is that where possible, we pass the records on to other local county recorders. So actually we are benefiting just outside of our county boundaries as well. So as well as growing numbers of records, we've got growing numbers of recorders. Now, there was a blip in 2022. You can see on the graph there. I have no idea what that was about, but as a general rule, we are growing our numbers, which is really, really great. What we haven't had time to do, and what we really, really want to do, is to do some crunching on these numbers. So how many people who submitted a record in 2020 still submitting records in 2023? Is there a correlation between people who sign up to our e-newsletter and therefore hear from us on a monthly basis? Are they submitting more records than people who don't sign up to the monthly e-newsletter? How can we best support these people by knowing more about them? So when we launched the project, we decided that we'd launch a monthly e-newsletter. This now goes out to over 360 people. Engagement is really strong. So for those of you who might not know, the average open rate for an e-newsletter in our sector is about 20 to 25%. From the trust point of view, we get a lot higher than that with our normal e-newsletter, but from our wildlife sightings point of view, the open rate for it is about 60, 65%, and people really are engaging with it. So when it goes out, people open it, then we get a flurry of records, sometimes about the species that we talk about, sometimes about other completely random species. Each newsletter gives a shout out to people who recorded in the previous month. There's information about what to look for in the month ahead, how you can help wildlife on your patch, tips that things that you might need to take out with you when you record. I generally put a video in there. In fact, maybe I'll put today's video when Ellie gets them on YouTube. Other interesting things that you can watch if you're not able to get outside for whatever reason. And as a way of further engaging people and inspiring them to become full-blown recorders, whatever that might mean, last year we held 3 introductory sessions here at Lower Smythe Farm in our wildlife garden for people who subscribe to the e-newsletter to come and meet some of the wildlife sightings team. And they weren't amazingly well attended. One was held on a monsoon night day, so I'm not surprised that nobody turned up to that one. But we had fantastic feedback from the people who did come and how valuable they found it and how valuable they're finding wildlife sightings. We're trying it again this year, but we're putting a bit more of a spin on it. We're making the events more targeted rather than general. We're really focusing on the fact that these are in a wildlife garden, so the things that you find here, you might be able to find at home. We try to offer a blend of formal and informal because we don't want people who are completely new to this to be completely overwhelmed or intimidated by the knowledge of recorders or feeling like they can't come along because it's not for them. But we do recognise and we do acknowledge that this isn't the way that everybody wants to learn. So how else can we do things? Can we do online things? Can we make things formal or informal? Do we do training courses rather than just come and have a ramble? So that's a work in progress, and we're trying to find our way through that. One of the things we want to do is to set up a Facebook group so that we can provide a forum for people to chat to each other about it, but we just haven't been able to find the time and the capacity to do that. I did, however, want to add in a couple of quotes, and I'm really sorry I'm going to be one of those awful presenters who reads things right off the screen to you. These are a couple of quotes that we've had as feedback from a survey that we did last year to e-newsletter subscribers. And the reason I want to show them is because it's not just the BRC and the recorders and the trusts that are benefiting from this. It's not just our knowledge of wildlife that's benefiting, but actually we are giving people a purpose to go out there and look at what's around them and learn about them. So I've really enjoyed learning about the distribution of species across the county and whether they have spread or declined. I live on the edge of Worcester and I'm dismayed at some of the antics of housing developers and the subtle chipping away of habitat. So being aware of what to look for as we walk around our local area is really helpful. I very much enjoyed receiving identifications of photos I was lucky enough to take during 2023. It is a wonderful incentive for me to get out there and capture photographic evidence of the things that live all around me. So it's great to know that actually we're also having a benefit for the people that are taking part as well. So we're getting more records, we're engaging more people, but what about that other aim of learning about wildlife? So it's great to be able to plot records on the map. We've got a much more interactive map on our website, and to see that we are filling in some blank spaces. And actually you can see from the map that a lot of those blank spaces are happening in areas where big urban conurbation areas, really the big towns and the city of Worcester. It's still early in our long-term data view, but we are starting to compare wildlife sightings against historic records and records that are coming in from other sources, such as iRecord, BirdTrack and the like. With some species like hummingbird hawk moths, we've actually seen a really, really rapid change in the trend of when they're seen. So in the early days of wildlife sightings 4 years ago, we were really only seeing hummingbird hawk moths in late summer, in the more traditional time when you'd expect to see them. But with the incredible heat wave in 2022, actually last year we had a flurry of records of hummingbird hawk moths that were managing, that had done really, really well in 2022, but were actually managing to survive a Worcestershire winter. And you can see from this photograph here, we started to have photographs of hummingbird hawk moths feeding on spring flowers like daffodils. Again, this is where we're mirroring what's going on in the wider community. We've got lots and lots of householders telling us what they're seeing in their gardens. The wider recording community, actually by the end of last year, were also saying the same thing. We've seen many more hummingbird hawk moths in spring than we have done in previous years. And our county bird and dragonfly recorders in particular have been absolutely fantastic at writing short reports so that I can feed that through to e-newsletter subscribers. They can learn about how what they're telling us is helping us to learn more about wildlife, and also to set out a few more press releases so that we can get even more records in. And these are things that are about, you know, changes in distribution, seasonality, and that kind of stuff. So I mentioned that we added some birds into the target species. We actually added house sparrows first and then house martins a year later. Our county bird recorder, Craig, is telling us that the records he receives through wildlife sightings are giving him a richer suite of information than the ones he would normally get through different, the wider recording community, so BirdTrack, iRecord and the like. And it goes back a little bit to what I was saying earlier, that as recorders, we sometimes get a little bit hooked on, I've seen X amount. And to be fair, if you're putting in your records to BirdTrack, you are really putting down how many birds you saw. There are other recording schemes for breeding birds, for example. But as well as putting lots new 1K squares, new 1K squares on the map for both house sparrows and house martins, Craig has said that the information he's coming through, this richer information, more often than not includes information about breeding. So for house martins, 88% of records that come through wildlife sightings in 2022 had information about breeding. So how many house martin nests, how many times they had a brood, how many fledged young there were. And the same for house sparrows. So a little bit less for house sparrows, but I think it's 50% of records coming in through wildlife sightings have information about breeding. And that's compared with only 12% of records that he would normally get in that include information about breeding. So are we reaching a different kind of recorder, one who's really looking at what's on their patch? And I know that many recorders look quite hard at what's on their patch, but perhaps the new recorders that we're reaching have got a slightly different focus. So yes, we're adding new 1K squares, but we're also helping to learn about that breeding success too. And for both house sparrows and house martins, both of whom have suffered catastrophic declines in the UK, this is really important information. For house martins, perhaps it can help us identify really where those pressures are. Are they in Africa? Are they on migration? Or are they right here in Worcestershire when they get home? There's no mud for them to build a nest. People have replaced traditional nesting spaces with plastic soffits that they can't attach their nests to. And there are no insects for them to eat when they get here. Is this what this is telling us potentially? And for house sparrows, Worcestershire is no different to the rest of the country. We've had massive declines, but perhaps some of this information can help to put some detail on why there are local gains or losses, for example. And the information that you've all been sat there waiting for, I've been waffling on about birds, I've been hacking on about hawk moths, but you really want to know whether this is making a difference to our damsels and dragonflies in the county. Well, our county recorder, Mike Averill, who I'm sure many of you know, has been involved with wildlife sightings since the very beginning, and he is an incredible advocate for it. We started with an easy species. We started with large red damselfly, which in the county we don't have small red, so that's relatively simple and straightforward. And then we added broad-bodied chasers in 2021. Over the 4 years of the project, because we asked for photographs, Mike has also been able to extract another 7 records of another 17 species that people have been submitting to us, which is fantastic. And because every record comes with a photograph, he's also been able to take all sorts of information from it, from, you know, whether there are exuviae there, breeding evidence, the different sexes of the damsels and dragons, what kind of habitat they're coming from. And quite often they've been coming from gardens, which is really, really great to see. The other thing that Mike's been able to help us to help recorders do, especially as a lot of these people are new to recording, not everybody by all means, but a lot of people are new to recording, is to help identify or tell the difference between those species that are difficult to separate when you're new at this. So is it an azure or a common blue? Is it a banded or a beautiful demoiselle? Is it a common or a ruddy darter? And when we've been having broad-bodied chaser records come in, is it actually a black-tailed skimmer or a scarce chaser? For Worcestershire in particular, it's been great to have extra pairs of eyes looking for new species to the county and some of the rarer ones. So willow emerald and hairy dragonflies are both new in the last couple of years or so. And Wildlife Sightings has put a few new dots on the map for willow emerald. Common clubtail and white-legged damselflies, not that common in the county. Common clubtails have been having a bit of a hard time about it, but actually Wildlife Sightings has brought in several new records in a few new locations of common clubtail, including the one on your screen there, which was taken in someone's garden not far from the River Severn, and what a great garden tick that would be. I'm certainly quite envious of it. Like Craig with his bird records, Mike's also finding out that he's receiving richer information from the sightings. And like I say, many of these photos are coming from people's gardens, and I think that's been one of the real advantages and benefits of Wildlife Sightings, is that we're finding out just how important gardens are for wildlife, something that we kind of knew about, but it's nice to have some evidence there, and how much some people are trying to do to help wildlife and attract wildlife into their spaces. That's been a real benefit, and Diana's constantly telling me about how many records she's getting in from people's gardens. I don't know whether it does, but perhaps that also helps to kind of counteract some of the recorder bias. We're starting to get records from hidden places, so urban spaces that we perhaps would not have got records from before, and not just from nature reserves or where traditional recorders live or visit. And I do say that with a bit of I have generalised where traditional recorders live and visit, as opposed to new ones, but I think you understand what I mean when I'm talking like that. So what does the future hold for our small, relatively small, modest, county-based citizen science project? So we're continuing to publicise the scheme through social media, through press releases. Worcestershire Wildlife Trust members, 11,000 households or so across the county, are just about to receive our spring magazine. That's got a 6-page feature in about how far we've come with wildlife sightings and why it's really important to record wildlife. But at the back end, there is so much we want to do, so much data crunching we want to do. I'm not a statistician. I come from a comms and a marketing and a heritage background. We really want a volunteer with a particularly analytical mind who can really take this historic data, the sightings data that's coming in from other sources, and analyse it to try and see if we are helping to identify trends or conquer recorder bias. We are really in the early days of this. We've only got 4 years worth of data, and this is something that will hopefully start to happen as the project moves on. We'd also really like to better analyse the people who are recording for us, mainly because we want to know how we can best help them and support them. Do they really just want to submit one record every now and then when they feel like it, or actually are there some people out there that want to do more and don't really know how to? So we want to know how we can do that. Do we do in-person sessions, online sessions? What tools do we need to create to help people understand more? I know that 1,300 records doesn't sound like absolutely loads, but I'm really proud of it. We've come from nowhere. We wanted to do something. We've done something, and it is making a difference, and people are getting something from it as well. We're having great conversations with people, great engagement with people. And I'd really just like to put a big thank you out there to our partners, to the Trust for supporting both myself and Nick for doing this, to Worcestershire Recorders and Worcestershire Biological Records Centre for jumping on board and being so incredibly supportive and trying to get this moving and growing. I really, really, really want to put a big thank you out there to Diana, because without Diana, we would not be in the state we're in now. She is absolutely fantastic, and she's pivotal to the project. So I'll be around for Q&As afterwards. Thank you so much for listening. And if anybody knows how I can clone Diana, I'd be really grateful to hear from you. Thank you.